I killed 5 men in one night. Not in war, not in self-defense, the way courts would recognize it. I killed them in the woods outside a plantation in Virginia, August 1859, and no one ever found the bodies. There's a ledger entry, Fletcher Plantation 5, hunters dispatched, 5, hunters lost. Investigation closed without conclusion. That's the only proof this happened. That, and the fact that I'm telling you now, they came to drag a boy back to bondage. I made sure they never dragged anyone back again. For 160 years, this stayed silent. Because speaking, it would have gotten me killed. Because the system only worked if people believed we couldn't think, couldn't plan, couldn't fight back. But I did. And someone needs to know, so I'm asking you to stay, to bear witness, to hear what was never meant to be heard. Because if you leave now, the silence wins again, and the silence has already won too much. The question is simple. If survival required you to become what they said you couldn't be, would you? Or would you accept the chains? I tell you this because the silence has worn me down more than the chains ever did. My name doesn't matter. Names were what they gave us, what they took, what they changed when we changed hands. But what I did, that stays fixed. That's mine. The night it happened was August. The kind of heat that sits on your chest even after dark. I've been on the Fletcher plantation for years by then, long enough to know the rhythms, the blind spots, the men who watched, and the men who only pretended to. For years, long enough to become furniture in their eyes. That's what saved me in the beginning. Not strength, not speed. Just there's certainty that furniture doesn't think. The order came down at supper. Fletcher himself rode out to the quarters, which meant something had gone wrong enough to require his personal attention. We kept our eyes down, bowls in hand, waiting. "Boy ran this morning," he said. Didn't say which boy. Didn't matter to him. Took food from the kitchen. Probably 10 miles gone by now. We knew it was Marcus, 17, built small, always moving like he expected to be hit. I'd seen him near the smokehouse that morning. Seen the way he looked at the tree line. I'd said nothing. Fletcher named 5 men for the hunt. White men from town, the kind who came when called because they liked the work. I knew 4 of them by reputation. The 5th was new, younger, eager in a way that made my skin crawl. "Tree them by morning," Fletcher said. "Dog handlers are already waiting." The men checked their rifles, their powder. They laughed about something I couldn't hear. One of them looked at us as they mounted up, and I made my face blank the way I'd learned. Looked through him like he was weather. They rode out as the last light died. I finished my bowl, walked to my place on the floor of the sleeping house, laid down with the others in the dark. Then I rose and left through the gap in the back wall that had been there for 2 years, the one the overseers had never found because they never looked close at what we built. The memory came as I moved through the first trees. Not of this place, of before. I was 7, maybe 8, still with my mother in Maryland. Before the sale that split us, she'd taken me into the woods to gather herbs, and we'd gotten turned around as evening came. I remember the panic rising in my chest, the dark, the sounds, the certainty we were lost. She'd put her hand on my shoulder, spoken low. "The scared thing runs. The thinking thing watches where the scared thing runs and goes different." We'd stood still until the stars came clear, found west by their position, walked home by what we could see, not what we feared. I was not the scared thing anymore. I was something else. The dogs hit scent fast. I could hear them even at distance. That particular violence in their voices. They'd found Marcus's trail heading north, toward the river, exactly where a running man would go. The hunters followed loud. I could track them by sound horses' voices, the crash of bodies through brush. They trusted their numbers, their guns, their right to be there. I moved in tree shadow, parallel to their line. The moon was 3 days from full, bright enough to navigate by, bright enough to expose someone on open ground. I waited for clouds, counted my breathing, made distance only when darkness thickened. One of the hunters pushed ahead of the others. The eager one. I could hear him thrashing through blackberry thicket, cursing, certain he'd catch the scent first. I let him pass below me, watched him tear his jacket on thorns, saw him stumble into a gully thick with deadfall. He didn't come out, not on his own. The others noticed his absence slowly. At first they called for him casually, annoyed, then concerned, then afraid. I was already moving. The group tightened formation, started searching in pairs, kept their rifles ready, eyes scanning the dark like they'd suddenly remembered where they were deep in woods they didn't know, hunting something that might not run. I circled behind them, used the trick Marcus had probably never learned. When they look for what's ahead, they don't watch what's behind. One of them fired into darkness at movement that wasn't there. A deer, probably, or wind. The sound echoed wrong through the trees, made them all flinch. That was north. One said, that was west. Another argued. They split to investigate. I followed the one who went west. Rain started around midnight, light at first, then steady. The kind that makes sound carry strange, that makes men huddle and curse and lose their careful edge. I remembered being 10, crossing the storm with my mother on the road after sail. How she'd taught me to count steps by sound alone, to move during thunder when noise covered everything. I moved during thunder, found the western hunter stopped under a hickory, trying to shelter, his rifle propped against the trunk, his back to the dark. I didn't think about it. That's a lie. I thought about everything, about 4 years of watching men like him, about Marcus running toward a river that might drown him, about the woman in Maryland who taught me to be the thinking thing. I thought about all of it in the space of 3 heartbeats. Then I did what the night required. By the time I reached the river, there were only 3 voices calling through the rain. I buried myself in reeds at the bank, let water cover everything but my face. Learned this from watching muskrats. As a child, how to breathe shallow, how to let cold settle into your bones without shaking, how to become part of the landscape instead of something moving through it. The hunters searched the bank at dawn's first gray light, frustrated, afraid now in a way they hadn't been at start. One of them said something about turning back. Another called him a coward. They were fracturing or waited. The morning revealed what night had hidden. They found signs blood on leaves, broken branches, marks in mud that told a story. But the marks didn't agree with each other. Trails that doubled back, scent that stopped mid. One of them said it out loud, something's wrong. I'd learned about wrongness on the plantation, how it spreads when the pattern breaks, how people who depend on certainty come apart when the world stops making sense. These men had come expecting a hunt, a boy running scared, easy to tree, easy to drag back for Fletcher's justice. They hadn't expected to be hunted back. I spent the day moving between their searches, used birdsong to mask footsteps, stayed too low ground where sightlines broke, let them chase sounds that led nowhere. By afternoon, only 2 voices remained. They argued, blame rising like steam. Each, certain the other, had made mistakes. Neither willing to say what they both knew that 4 men had come into these woods and vanished. Not home, not to town. Vanished. I watched them from a ridge as they shouted at each other. Saw one of them finally break and run. Not north toward the river, not south toward the plantation. Just away, into the deep woods where the trails ended and the land got thick. The last hunter stood alone, called for his companions, got silence back. The memory surfaced again as I watched him. Not Maryland this time. The auction block in Virginia, 3 years back, standing with 12 others, while men circled and pointed and discussed our teeth, our muscles, our probable years of service. A man had bid on me and lost to Fletcher's higher offer. He'd looked disappointed. Told his companion I'd have been good for heavy work. I'd looked at that man and thought, you don't know what I'm good for. You don't know what any of us are good for. Standing on that ridge, watching the last hunter turn in circles, I remembered that thought, and I knew what I was good for now. He tried to track back to the plantation. I could see him working through the geography in his mind, trying to remember which direction they'd come from, which trees looked familiar. Everything looks the same in these woods if you don't know them. I knew them. I followed him as he stumbled through gullies, doubled back from ravines, stopped to listen for sounds that would orient him. Sometimes I'll let him see movement, Just enough to turn him. Just enough to keep him lost. He began to run, not the strong run of a man with purpose. The panicked run of prey. I didn't have to chase. I just had to wait for him to tire. He collapsed near a creek bed at dusk. Sat with his back against an oak, rifle across his lap, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. I could have left him there. Let the woods take him slow thirst, hunger, cold, fear. He'd be dead in 3 days without help. But I thought about Marcus, about whether he'd made the river, about what would happen if this man found his way back and told Fletcher what he suspected, about what Fletcher would do to the quarters if he believed we were the kind of people who fought back. I made my choice standing in the last light of that second day, made it the way my mother taught me not, as the scared thing, as the thinking thing. When full dark came, I approached from downslope, where his eye line wouldn't catch me. He was muttering to himself. Prayers, maybe, or just sounds, to fill the silence. I was 3 steps away when he sensed something and turned. His face, in that moment I see it still. Not anger, not even fear exactly. Recognition. He knew what I was, what I'd always been, underneath a mask of furniture. The thing his world pretended didn't exist. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I am not proud of what I did. I am not ashamed of it either. Pride and shame are luxuries for people who have choices, who can look back at their actions and judge them against other possible actions they might have taken. I had no other possible actions, only the one that kept me breathing, only the one that kept the quarters safe from Fletcher's questions, only the one that made sense in the arithmetic of that night 5 men who came to drag a boy back to bondage, versus my continued existence in a world that had already decided I didn't deserve it. That's not pride. That's not shame. That's just math. I took his rifle first. Then I did what needed doing. Afterward, I sat beside him in the dark and felt nothing. No triumph. No horror. Just the emptiness of a task completed. I thought about Marcus again. Wondered if he'd made it across the river. If he was running still. Or if the water had taken him, or if other hunters had found him first. I thought about my mother, who I'd never see again, about whether she'd be ashamed of what her teaching had made me capable of. I thought about the 4 other men somewhere in these woods, and about whether their families would mourn them or just replace them. Mostly I thought about mourning, about the story I'd have to tell when I walked back into the quarters, about the face I'd have to wear. The furniture face. The one that doesn't think. I stayed in the woods until the 3rd dawn, moved carefully back toward the plantation, watching for search parties that never came. Fletcher hadn't sent anyone else. Either he didn't care enough about 5 white hunters to risk more men, or he decided the woods had swallowed them and there was no point. I slipped back through the gap in the wall before morning bell, laid down in my place like I'd never left. The man beside me, Daniel, who'd worked the plantation since childhood, opened one eye and looked at me. Said nothing, but he knew. The story came down 3 days later. 5 men had gone into the woods, hunting a runaway Nan, returned. Search parties found signs of struggle, blood, confusion, no bodies, no clear answer about what had happened. Marcus was never mentioned. Either he'd made it across the river and was gone, or he'd died quietly somewhere the searchers didn't look. Fletcher stood in the yard and told us the hunters had probably lost their way. Got separated, fell prey to accident or animal. His voice said one thing. His eyes said another. He looked at each of us slowly, searching for the truth he suspected but couldn't prove. When his eyes reached mine, I looked back with a furniture face. Blank, empty, incapable. He moved on. That night, lying in the dark, I felt the weight of it settle. Not guilt. Not exactly. The knowledge that I'd crossed a line that couldn't be that I'd become something Fletcher's world said was impossible, a thinking thing that fought back. That one, that survived. And that I could never admit it, never speak it, never let anyone see what I'd proven in those woods. Because the moment they knew what I was capable of, they'd kill me. Not for what I'd done, for what it meant about all of us. I close my eyes and see the last hunter's face. That moment of recognition, when he understood that the furniture had always been watching, had always been thinking, had always been capable of this. I see it every night. And every morning I wake up and put the mask back on. Because survival isn't about one night in the woods. It's about every day after. It's about carrying the truth in silence until silence becomes its own kind of death. So I tell you now, across whatever distance separates your time from mine, I killed 5 men in one night, and the world moved on like it never happened. PART2, the seasons turned like they always did. Summer to fall to winter to spring. The work continued. The quotas filled and emptied as people were sold away or brought in. Fletcher's plantation ran like a clock. I became better at the furniture face. Some days, I barely felt human underneath it. 3 months after the hunt, they brought in a new man, bought him from an estate sale in Richmond. His name was Isaiah, though that probably wasn't the name he was born with. He worked the rows beside me for a week before speaking beyond necessity. Then one evening, pulling weeds in the failing light, he said quietly, "You were gone the night those men disappeared." My hands kept moving. "I was here." Daniel said, "You were here." But I saw his face when he said it. I pulled another weed, dropped it in the basket. Isaiah's voice came lower. "Whatever you did, I'm not asking about it. I'm just saying, some of us notice. Some of us remember." I looked at him then, really. He had scars across his back that spoke of punishment, scars on his wrists that spoke of chains. But his eyes were clear, thinking eyes. "There's nothing to remember," I said. He nodded slowly. "That's the right answer. But something passed between us. An understanding. I wasn't the only one wearing a mask. Winter came hard that year. 3 people died in the quarters from cold and hunger. Fletcher didn't replace them until spring. Said the winter quarter rations couldn't support more the arithmetic again. Oh, with the arithmetic. We were numbers in his ledger. Costs and values. Depreciating assets. I thought about the 5 hunters often during those cold months, about whether their families grieved, about whether Fletcher had compensated them for the loss, about whether anyone had bothered to assign them value the way Fletcher assigned us value. Probably not the same way. White men who died hunting runaway slaves became tragic accidents, cautionary tales, heroes who'd sacrificed themselves for the social order. We just died. No Tillies, no heroes, just numbers crossed off ledgers. Spring brought new trouble. Marcus's brother came to the plantation. Fletcher had bought him from a seller in North Carolina, not knowing the connection until after purchase. The brother Samuel asked about Marcus within a day of arriving. "Your brother ran," the overseer told him. "Las Auguste didn't make it." Samuel's face stayed neutral, but I saw his hands tighten. "He make the river?" Samuel asked. "Don't know. Never found him." Never found the men who went after him either. The overseer watched Samuel carefully as he said it, looking for reaction. Samuel gave him nothing, but that night in the quarters, he found me. Daniel said, "You might know something." I kept my voice flat. "Daniel talks too much." Did my brother make it? The truth was, I didn't know. I'd been too busy surviving my own night to track Marcus's path. But Samuel needed something. Needed to believe his brother's run had meant something. "I think so," I said. "I think he made the river." It was possibly a lie. Probably a lie, but it was the only kindness I could offer. Samuel nodded once, walked away. 2 weeks later, he tried to run. They caught him. Before he cleared the tree line, they whipped Samuel in the yard as example. Made all of us watch. Fletcher stood on his porch throughout, expression neutral, coffee cup in hand. The overseer laid 30 lashes. Samuel didn't scream, didn't beg, just bled. Afterward, they took him to the barn. Left him there to heal or die as he would. I thought about going to him, about telling him the truth of what happened that August night, about whether it would comfort him or destroy him to know his brother hadn't been the only one fighting back. I didn't go, because speaking the truth would only spread the danger. The mask had to stay on. Samuel survived the whipping. Barely. Took him 6 weeks to work again. When he did, he moved slow, careful. The fight had been beaten out of him. Or that's what it looked like. I recognized that look. The furniture face? He was learning what I'd learned. How to hide the thinking thing. How to survive by appearing broken. But his eyes, when he thought no one was watching, were not broken at all. Summer came again. 1 year since the night in the woods. I'd thought the anniversary might bring something. Guilt, maybe. Or vindication. Some feeling to mark the passage. Instead, I felt only the steady weight of continuation. Of waking each day and putting on the mass. Of moving through work in weather and Fletcher's arith. Of carrying the truth in silence. Then in July, Fletcher called a meeting in the yard. We assembled at dusk, all of us, even the ones too sick to work. Fletcher stood on his porch with a man I didn't recognize. White, well-dressed, carried himself like authority. "This is Marshal Whitmore," Fletcher announced. "He's investigating the disappearance of the 5 men who went missing last summer. He has questions." My heart stayed steady. Years of practice at that. The marshal stepped forward, looked at us the way all white men looked at us, like we were livestock that might speak if prompted correctly. "I've been hired by the families," he said, "to determine what happened, to find evidence, to bring closure." He walked along our lines slowly, studying faces. "Someone knows something," he continued. "Someone saw something, and I'm going to find out who." He stopped in front of me. Our eyes met. I gave him the furniture face. The empty one, the incapable one. He frowned, moved on. The marshal stayed 2 days, interviewed people separately, asked about that night, about who was where, about sounds heard, movements seen. Everyone gave the same answer. We were here. In the quarters, we heard nothing. The story held because it had to hold, because we all understood what was at stake. Not just my life, all our lives. If Fletcher believed we were capable of organized resistance, of coordinated violence, he'd break us apart, sell us separately, destroy any bonds that might threaten his control. The mask protected all of us, so everyone wore it. The marshal left frustrated, told Fletcher he'd found no evidence, no witnesses, no clear indication of what had happened to the 5 men. Probably got lost, he concluded. "Woods around here are dangerous if you don't know them." Fletcher nodded, paid the marshal, watched him ride away. Then he turned to the quarters, looked at us for a long time. He knew, I could see it in his face. He knew someone had done something, had fought back, had won, but he couldn't prove it. And proving it would mean admitting we were capable of it, would mean admitting the system had a flaw. So he said nothing, just watched us with those knowing eyes, and we looked back with furniture faces, the lie preserved on both sides. That night, Daniel came to my place in the sleeping house, sat down beside me in the dark. "The marshal asked me about you specifically," he said quietly. My breathing didn't change. "What did you tell him?" "Same thing I tell everyone. You were here that night, never left. Thank you. Don't thank me. I didn't lie for you." I turned to look at him. "I lied for all of us," he said, "because if they knew what one of us could do, they'd punish all of us for it. That's how it works." He was right. That was exactly how it worked. "But I need you to understand something," Daniel continued. "What you did it can't happen again. Not because it was wrong, because we can't survive another investigation. Another marshal, another Fletcher looking at us like we're wolves pretending to be sheep." "I know." "Do you? Because Samuel's getting that look. That same look you had before. And if he tries something, he won't. You can't know that. But I could, because I recognize Samuel's look for what it was. Not the prelude to action, the aftermath of it. The face of someone who'd already done something irreversible and was learning to live with it. 2 months later, one of the overseers disappeared, just vanished between the morning watch and noon. His horse was found grazing near the south fields. His rifle was still in its saddle holster, but he was gone. Fletcher organized a search. They combed the woods for 3 days. Found nothing. No blood, no body, no sign of struggle, just absence. I watched Samuel during those 3 days, watched his face stay neutral, watched his hands stay steady, watched him wear the furniture face perfectly. The search was called off. Fletcher marked the overseer down as deserted. Hired a replacement within a week. Life continued, but something had shifted. Fletcher changed the watch patterns, brought in more armed men, tightened the boundaries of where we could move, when we could move. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. The years moved forward. More people came. More people left. Some sold. Some died. A few ran. Isaiah organized whisper networks in the quarters. Information about which overseers drank. Which ones fell asleep on watch. Where the gaps were in Fletcher's arithmetic, he never spoke about the night of the 500s. But sometimes he'd look at me with those thinking eyes and nod slightly. We understood each other. We were all carrying truths that couldn't be spoken, all wearing masks that couldn't slip. 4 years after that August night, the war came. We heard about it in pieces. Rumors from travelers, newspapers, the overseers left lying around, whispers from the quarters on neighboring plantations. States splitting, armies forming, white men fighting each other over whether we counted as human. The arithmetic again. Always the arithmetic. Fletcher tried to maintain normalcy, kept the work schedules, kept the punishments, acted like the world wasn't fracturing around us. But we could feel it changing, could feel the system's certainty cracking. The Union Army came through our county in the spring of 1863, blue uniforms, rifles, promises. They told us we were free, just like that. Free. Fletcher stood on his porch and watched them. His face had the look of a man whose ledger had just been erased. We walked away from the plantation that day. Some of us toward the army, some of us toward roads we remembered from before bondage. I walked toward the woods. I went back to that creek bed where the last hunter had died. Stood there in daylight for the first time. Saw it clearly, the oak, the ravine, the stones. Nothing remained of that night. Rain and seasons had washed away the blood. Animals had scattered anything that could be scattered. It was just a place. Neutral. Empty. But I remembered every detail. His face, his recognition, his understanding of what I was. I'd killed 5 men in one night. And the truth was I'd do it again. Not because I wanted to. Because the world had given me only 2 choices. Be the furniture that accepts its fate, or be the thinking thing that fights back. I chose to think. I chose to fight. I chose to survive. I never found Market. Never learned if he made the river. Never learned if Samuel's belief that his brother lived was truth or necessary fiction. I never told Samuel what I'd done that night. Never gave him the satisfaction or burden of knowing someone had avenged his brother's run. I carried the truth alone, because that was the only way to carry it. The years after the war were hard in different ways. Freedom without resources. Rights without protection. Names on paper that meant nothing when the men with guns decided otherwise. I moved north, found work, built a life that looked like the life free people lived, but the mask never quite came off. I'd learned too well how to be furniture, how to seem harmless, how to let people underestimate me. It became habit. Then identity. Then the only way I knew how to move through the world. I'm old now, old enough that the events of that August night feel both impossibly distant and present as breath. I'm telling you this because I need someone to know, not for forgiveness. I don't believe I need forgiveness for surviving, not for judgment. History has already judged what that world did to us. I'm telling you because the silence became unbearable. Because 5 men died in those woods, and the world called it mystery. Because Marcus ran, and the world called it theft. Because we wore masks so perfect that people forgot we had faces underneath. I killed 5 men in one night. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't noble. It wasn't the resistance that should be celebrated in history books. It was desperate. It was brutal. It was the only mathematics available to me. They came to drag a boy back to bondage. I made sure they never dragged anyone anywhere again. The truth is this. The system only worked because they believed we couldn't think, couldn't plan, couldn't fight back effectively, couldn't be dangerous. Every time one of us proved otherwise, the lie got harder to maintain. So they erased the evidence, called it mystery, moved on. Because acknowledging what we were capable of would mean acknowledging what they'd done to us, what they'd forced us to become. I see them sometimes in dreams, all 5, standing in the woods, watching me, not accusing, not forgiving, just watching, bearing witness to what was done, to what had to be done, to the truth that no one wanted to speak. This is my testimony. I am not asking you to condone what I did. I am not asking you to understand it. I am only asking you to know that it happened, that I happened, that we happened, all of us who wore masks and survived and carried truths that would have gotten us killed. We were not furniture. We were never furniture. We were thinking things who learned to hide in plain sight, who fought back when fighting back meant death, who survived by any means available. I killed 5 men in one night. The world called it mystery. History called it silence. I call it what it was. The only choice a thinking thing could make. When I die, the story dies with me. Unless you carry it forward, unless you refuse to let the silence stand, unless you remember that every system of oppression creates the conditions for its own resistance, and that resistance isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just a person in the woods, thinking clearly, doing what survival requires. My name doesn't matter. What I did matters. That I'm telling you matters. That you're hearing it matters. The rest is silence. The silence I've earned. The silence I've paid for. The silence that can never be comfortable again. I killed 5 men in one night, and I'm still here. And that has to mean something. Even if it only means this. I survived.